Welcome. I'm glad that you are here. Um, this week we're starting a new section of philosophy, a new kind of field of study. So, our first was obviously philosophy of religion, and we're moving on from that. So, if you hated it, then this is good news. If you liked it, this is potentially bad news. Um, and we're going to move into theory of knowledge or epistemology. So, how do we know things? How do we come to know things? Things of that nature. So, I should say thanks everyone for sending in the paper proposals and stuff. I've talked to a few people, um, just kind of making sure that you're on the same page and that you have a good topic and everything. If you want to change your topic or anything like that, just run it by me. Or if you need help finding resources or ideas or anything like that, we can do that. So just let me know. Um, so yeah, we're moving on to epistemology, and keep in mind, so your papers are due in like 16 days or something like that. So that's like about 2 weeks. So, sorry, my dog's playing with a toy. Hold on. Yeah. So, epistemology is the theory of knowledge. It comes from episteme, meaning knowledge, which it's a Greek word, and then ology is the study of. So that's how we get epistemology. And I've talked about it a little bit because Alvin Plantinga's paper had a lot to do with epistemology, so like classical foundationalism and stuff like that. But I think for the most part, we're not gonna touch on too much contemporary epistemology work. It's gonna be mostly like historic epistemology work. So we're starting with Plato, who's like almost as ancient as you can get. And so that's what we'll be talking about today is the Meno from Plato, and kind of how that influenced the rest of our study of epistemology. But first, we'll just run through like a few definitions and just get a better understanding of epistemology in general. Then we'll dive into the Meno. So, the big question is, what is knowledge? And I mean, obviously, you can have different answers to that, but basically, there's three main types of knowledge. There's propositional knowledge, personal knowledge, and procedural knowledge. So, propositional knowledge has to do with propositions, which are things that can be true or false. So, now you can't see too much of the board, but you can see maybe right here. Yeah. Propositions are things that are true or false. So if I say, I know that there was a wreck today on 71, that is something that is either true or false. That happened or it didn't happen. And propositional knowledge is also referred to as knowledge that. So, let's see. I'll just erase that. Propositional knowledge, which kind of makes sense if it's dealing with propositions which are things that are true or false, that it would be knowledge that, because you know that something happened or didn't happen or is true or isn't true. So propositional knowledge is also knowledge that. I know that. That type of thing. And that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about. Probably most. Knowledge that and knowledge how are normally the things that we talk most about in philosophy. So, another type of knowledge is personal knowledge, and that's like, I know my husband, or I know my friend, my best friend, whatever. You don't like, they're not true or false. Their existence isn't, well, I mean, maybe their existence is, but they themselves are not true or false. So I don't know that my husband. I know my husband. I know who he is, and that type of thing. If you read, it gives the example of reading a biography about someone. You'll be reading a lot of propositional knowledge about that person, and at the end, you won't really have a personal knowledge of them. You'll just have a lot of knowledge about them. Knowledge that they went to World War II, or knowledge, stuff like that. You won't know them as people. So, personal knowledge is like knowing a person, being acquainted with that person. Or I guess it could be like knowing a city. So, I know Fayetteville because I live here and I'm familiar with it. I'm acquainted with it. So then you get the last one, which is procedural knowledge, which is knowledge how. So procedural, another word for it is knowledge how. So that's things like I know how to ride a bike. I know how to make coffee. I know how to write. That type of thing. It can obviously be more complex than that, but that's it in its simplest form. I know how to cook, whatever. So those are the three main types of knowledge that we'll be talking about. And we might not always talk about them by name, but you'll kind of know like the basics, and be able to tell which kind of knowledge it is. We can always break it down too. So, knowledge has to be defined in some way, right? We can't just like, I don't know, I'll be working with a different definition of what knowledge is. Because in that case, we wouldn't get very far in epistemology if everybody was working with a different set of requirements or criteria for knowledge. So we kind of have to come together and agree on what knowledge looks like. So we'll say criteria for knowledge. The one that is most undisputed is truth. So in order for you to know something, it has to be true. I can't say like, I know that the Razorbacks won this weekend, because it's just simply untrue. I can say I know that the Razorbacks lost this weekend, because that is true. So truth is a fundamental criteria for knowledge. You can never truly be said to know something if it's false. So that's one that not too many people, and by too many, I'm pretty sure like nobody argues against that. That is a fundamental criteria for knowledge. Now, the next one that is not super controversial, it is, I mean, some people can argue against it, but not super controversial, is belief. So something has to be true, and also you have to believe it. So if I really thought that the Razorbacks didn't win this weekend, but I just said that they did win, then I wouldn't have knowledge on the topic because I don't believe what I'm saying. So it has to be a true belief that you have. And I know belief can be like a loaded word, but really we just mean like, what do you think about that? Do you think, it's you don't have to have like a robust belief, like belief in God, like we've been talking about. It just has to be like, yeah, I think that happened, or I think that it didn't happen. So you have to believe something in order for you to know it. And I mean, some people can disagree with that, but that one's also Not super controversial. Most people acknowledge that. So, in order for S to know P, so sometimes philosophers will substitute, like just kind of write it in more logical form, write phrases in more logical form so that it makes more sense. To me, that's not always helpful, so if it's not helpful to you, just ignore it. It is helpful to some, so it might be to you. But if you say S, meaning a person, knows P, a proposition, then that means that S must believe P. It's an easy way to write it out. So, basically, truth and belief are necessary conditions for S to know P, or they're necessary conditions for knowledge in general. It has to be true and you have to believe it in order for you to have knowledge of it. Now we kind of see the separation between necessary and sufficient. So necessary meaning you have to have those two things in order for it to be knowledge, but truth and belief are not sufficient criteria for knowledge. So it's not that you only need truth and belief in order to have knowledge. There's something else going on. And since Plato's time, for the most part, up until like mid 1900s, people agreed that third point or third criteria was justification. So, in order for you to have knowledge, it has to be true, you have to believe it, and you have to be justified in believing it. You have to have a reason why you think that, or reasons. You can't just like believe it out of thin air and it be just happen to be right. You need to have reasons to back it up. So those would be necessary and sufficient conditions, those three, for the most part. So we'll get into this whenever we talk about the Meno, but Plato describes something called correct opinion, which is basically like a right guess that you believe. So if I really think that the Razorbacks lost this weekend, but I wasn't for sure because I didn't watch the game or didn't hear anything about it, and it was true, that's correct opinion, but it's not knowledge. It's not knowledge because I don't really have any reason for thinking that. Other than like it just seems to like that would be the case probably. That would probably be true. And correct belief or correct opinion is not as good as knowledge. And we'll talk about why when we get to the Meno. So those are basically the three main components: truth, belief, and justification. So the definition that stood most of the test of time for knowledge was justified true belief. Your belief needs to be true and it needs to be justified. And then you have knowledge. Hold on one second. Okay, sorry. So the thing that challenged this definition of knowledge was something known as the Gettier case. So it was developed by Edmund Gettier in a paper in 1963 called Is Justified True Belief Knowledge? And he was the first to really come up with a good argument for why justified true belief might not capture all that knowledge is. And we'll talk about that on Thursday, so we won't talk about it too much now. But just know that before Gettier, justified true belief was basically the definition for knowledge. And for the most part, that definition's going to do the job that you need it to. There are cases where it won't really work, but for the most part, it's going to get the job done. So, oh gosh, let me shut my door, sorry. Okay, so now we'll dive into Plato and the Meno. We talked about Plato a little bit at the beginning of class, like when class started, at the beginning of the year, I should say, because he's one of the most famous philosopher, so I just thought that it was important that we know who he is and stuff. So, but we'll kind of recap. So Plato was, I guess I'll just write it. He's from the ancient Greek period of philosophy. He came right after Socrates. So Socrates was Plato's teacher. And then Plato ended up being Aristotle's teacher. So Plato was from 429 BC to 347 BC. So, long time ago. He's from Greece. Athens, I'm pretty sure is, mostly where he spent his time. He founded an academy, which was just where people learned a bunch of stuff. And yeah, he was Aristotle's teacher. So very famous, very prolific also. One thing that happened a lot in more ancient philosophy was writing in the form of dialogue. So, I mean, you've read it, but Plato isn't writing like how we've been reading before, where they make their argument, write in paragraphs or whatever. Plato's writing just a conversation between two people. And so Socrates is the character. And Socrates was a real person, but in this case, Plato is basically using Socrates as his mouthpiece. So whatever you see that Socrates said, he probably didn't actually say. In some of the earlier Platonic writings, Socrates did actually say those things, but then you get to the point where Plato's just kind of using Socrates' name in order to say what he's trying to say. So what Socrates is saying in the Meno is probably more indicative of Plato's views than Socrates. And they're probably pretty similar since Socrates was Plato's teacher, but there will always be, some differences. So writing in dialogue, in some ways it can be really helpful to read because, you get to watch a conversation unfold. So for some people, dialogues are going to be easier to read because you just imagine it as two real people having this conversation and coming to a conclusion. For some people, it'll be harder to read because it's not quite as clear, because sometimes it's like, oh, is Socrates saying this? Oh, no, it doesn't really seem like that. Maybe the other guy's trying to say this, and, because Socrates, or Plato, will use Socrates and then use his other characters to point Socrates to the right answer, and Socrates will be right at the end because Plato is right at the end in his story. So that's kind of how those work. They can be confusing, I realize, just because, this is confusing. Yes, we did. And there's no trace anywhere of anyone teaching people how to be good. Right. And if there's no one teaching it, there's no one learning it? Apparently not. It's kind of like, what are you really trying to say? Kind of get to the point type of thing sometimes. But it can be beneficial. So you might like it, you might not. And I think all of Plato's writing is in dialogue. We see this in Berkeley, who we'll talk about later. He's from the modern era of philosophy, which is much later than Plato, but so you can still use dialogue, and it can still be helpful. Not too many people use it like these days, like in contemporary philosophy, but it doesn't have to be dead if you don't want it to be. This would be a weird way to write a paper, so I would not recommend that for your papers, but it's just a different way of writing. So the Meno is one of Plato's writings, obviously, and it deals primarily with knowledge and virtue. So this is some of Plato's epistemology coming out. And there's a little bit in here that doesn't have too much to do with epistemology and has more to do with virtue and being good, but it kind of sets the stage for for his theory on epistemology. So the dialogue starts with Socrates and Meno talking about virtue and whether it's teachable or not. So they've talked about this for a long time. So we're kind of jumping in the middle of a conversation. And let's see. So Socrates is bugging Meno, trying to ask him a ton of questions. So another way that these dialogues work is that Socrates will ask like a billion questions because he's trying to get to the right answer. But the way he gets to it is by asking so many questions. So that's why it's kind of unclear sometimes, because like, are you asking this because you know the answer, or are you asking it because you don't know the answer? Most of the time he kind of knows the answer and is just trying to guide the person he's talking to into the right answer, which is pretty much what's happening here. So, let's see. So the fact that they're talking about virtue isn't super significant to us right now. It's just kind of how they end up talking about knowledge. So they've decided that nobody teaches virtue and that nobody learns virtue. They did this earlier in the dialogue, something that we won't read. So just take their word for it. That nobody teaches virtue and nobody learns virtue. So then the conclusion would be that it's not something that can be taught. So there's no trace of anyone teaching anyone how to be a good person or how to be virtuous. And if there's no teaching it, then there's no learning it. And so it's probably not something that can be taught. So they kind of talk a lot, but the next thing that they realize is that it isn't always knowledge that guides people when they do well. Sometimes it's just correct opinion. So then they give this example, which this is a super famous example. It's something that I think of every time somebody talks about epistemology because it was something I learned in my intro class that just stuck with me. So he gives this example of, suppose someone knew the way to Larissa, which is a city in Greece. And they were showing everybody the way. Obviously, if they knew the way, then they would probably be good at showing people the right way. But what if someone had just a correct opinion about how to get to Larissa? So basically a correct guess. So they were like, suppose we could come up with our own example. Suppose someone was trying to get to Bentonville, and they had this idea that they believe that it's north, and so they think that you would just take the interstate north and you would get there. That would be true, but this person had never been there, so they don't actually know how to get there. So if they told somebody this is how you get there, they would end up being right because Bentonville is north and you would take the interstate to get there. But that person would not have knowledge because they didn't actually know. They just kind of guessed. And they were right. And this is where it gets interesting that person is just as beneficial as the person who actually knows how to get to Bentonville or Larissa. Because in both cases, they're good at showing people how to get there. So how is it that knowledge is actually better than correct opinion? That's something that is important to be thought. What makes knowledge valuable compared to correct opinion? Because they both operate in the same way, or you get the same benefit at the end. So they have to kind of figure out what makes knowledge more valuable. And basically the answer is that correct opinion is hit or miss. Sometimes it will be a hit and you will guess correctly and everybody will get to Bentonville is trying to go there. In other cases, you might guess and you would be wrong. And in that case, it would not be beneficial. So, one example of knowledge being better is that Socrates talks about, oh gosh, I always mean to look up how to say this word, and then I never do, and then I'm trying to say it. Daedalus, I'm just going to say it like that because I'm not 100% sure. Imagine Daedalus's statues. Daedalus was a mythological person, architect. So that built statues, I suppose. And his statues had to be shackled, meaning they had to be tied down. Because if they weren't, then they would escape. But if they were shackled, then they would be beautiful, they would be the best, they would be awesome. So he compares knowledge to being one of Daedalus's statues that is tied down. He compares true opinion to one of Daedalus's statues that is not tied down. So, true opinions, as long as they stay put, are a fine thing and do us a whole lot of good. Only they tend to not stay put for very long. They're always scampering away from a person's soul. So they're not very valuable until you shackle them by figuring out what makes them true. And then once they're shackled, they turn into knowledge and become stable and fixed. So that's why knowledge is a more valuable thing than correct opinion, and that's how knowledge differs from a correct opinion, by a shackle. So, you can picture this. By saying, okay, you have a belief. And if it is knowledge, then this belief is going to be tied down to the ground. It's going to be tied down. And this would be knowledge. And then if you didn't have it tied down, it's just floating in the air. It's like ready to go wherever. Floaty, floaty. This is just correct opinion. So what makes knowledge valuable is that it's tied down and your correct belief is not going to go anywhere. It's stable. So having stability of belief is really important because you know that it's not going to go anywhere. So if I knew how to get to Larissa, then every time you ask me, I will be right. If I don't know and I guess correctly, there could be one time where I guess correctly, and then the next time I might be like, ooh, I don't remember what I said last time, even though it was right. I'm going to guess again, and then I could be wrong. So a correct opinion isn't very helpful long term at all. So you might ask, what is your belief tied down by? And I think what Socrates is trying to get at is that correct opinion is tied down by justification, basically. So reasons why you believe something. So, for example, knowing the way to Larissa, you might know it because you've been there before. That could be a reason. And you know that this road turns into this road and yada, yada, yada. And that's how you get there. And those are a good justification for why you believe something and why it's knowledge. So then they kind of go back to talking about doing good and being good. And they kind of conclude that being good is teachable if it's a kind of wisdom. Then they realize that it's not a kind of wisdom, so it's not teachable. It's not a kind of wisdom because correct opinion, virtue can be gotten to by way of correct opinion rather than wisdom. So it's not the case that it's always wisdom. So because of that, you can't say that being good is a kind of wisdom. So it's not teachable. And that's kind of what this whole part of the dialogue is trying to figure out, whether virtue is teachable or not. So that's why they keep talking about it. That's the main point. Epistemology is just a kind of a side note. So they come to which this really isn't important to know since we're not talking about virtue, but it's good to know how they conclude. They say that being good does not come naturally, and it cannot be taught. So the way that somebody has virtue is just it arises by a gift of God. So divine gifting. And that's kind of how they end the dialogue, or at least this portion of the dialogue. It's kind of a long dialogue, but so the main thing to know from this passage is that knowledge is not correct opinion, because correct opinion is not tied down. Knowledge is. That's what makes the two different, and that's what makes knowledge more valuable. So those are the big ideas that you would need to know from that. Now we get. This is something that's not this part of the text is not in the book, but it's something that we should definitely talk about and mention. So I don't know if people talk about this normally outside of philosophy, probably not, but you may have heard of the Meno paradox. It's kind of famous, but it might just be famous in philosophy, which is definitely different than being famous in the rest of the real world. So, this is just in the notes, kind of at the end of this passage. So, it says this. You can't try to find out... Let me restart. That was not good. You can't try to find out about something you know about because you know about it, in which case there's no point trying to find out about it. And you can't try to find out about something you don't know about either, because then you don't even know what it is you're trying to find out about. That might sound like a lot. But basically the point is that if you're searching for knowledge, then, what's an easy way to put this? When searching for knowledge, you either know it or you don't know it. If you know it, then you're able to search for it, but you already have the answer, so there's no need to search for it. If you don't know what you're searching for, then you won't know it when you find it. So then there's no point in searching for it either. So this is a paradox because it kind of sounds like there's no way of searching for knowledge in a beneficial way, because either you already know it or you don't know it, so you won't know it when you find it. I hope that was clear. So if we take that and we say, yeah, that makes sense, then we would not be searching for knowledge at all. Because we would be convinced, okay, yeah, there's no point in searching for knowledge because either I know it or I don't. So let that sink in for a bit. That's kind of what Socrates is saying. Obviously, Socrates doesn't agree with this because Socrates and, Plato's whole life is about searching for knowledge. So what is a way that you could sidestep this problem? I'm going to give you a sec to think about it. Also, I don't know why I'm so out of breath, but I'm like, I've only been talking for 35 minutes and I'm so out of breath. I can barely keep going. Okay. Maybe because I'm tired? I don't know. I think it's probably allergies because people keep talking about the ragweed. And that probably makes it. It's not because I have COVID, I promise. When I say it's hard to breathe, I just mean I'm just talking too fast, probably. Anyways. So, okay. I hope that gave you some time to think about it. So, I mean, there's different ways that you could approach this. One way is that you could just totally be convinced and not search for knowledge at all anymore. But the one I find most convincing as a response to this would be that it's possible to have partial knowledge of something. So let's say, I really need to write down examples while I'm like preparing for class because I'm like, oh, I'll just think of it while I'm going. Searching for knowledge. Okay. Okay. So, say that I am in... Oh gosh, I cannot come up with a good example. Okay, let's think about searching for a person. Let's just use an example. So I'm looking for a person, and I don't know who they are. I've never met them. So on one hand, you could say, well, you don't know them. You don't know anything about them. So you can't search for them. Or I would already know them, so I would know immediately when I saw them. But sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes you have a little information. So maybe I know that this person has short brown hair and glasses or something. In that case, that kind of narrows things down, so I kind of know what I'm searching for. I still don't know this person, but I know a couple of qualities about them. And since I know, like, okay, they have short brown hair and glasses, then I look around and I narrow it down. So anybody that has blonde hair is gone. I don't need to know them. I'm not looking for them. Anybody without glasses, they're gone. I don't need to look for them. Then you kind of narrow it down and you're able to search for the person that you're looking for. So this could be the same way with knowledge. Maybe you have partial knowledge of something and you can kind of narrow it down, and then you end up finding something that you didn't know before. So one interesting thing about Plato is, I don't think we'll actually be talking about this, so I should tell you about it. Plato does not believe in new knowledge. So anything that you think that you come to know, he would say that it's not new to you. So this kind of goes into Plato's metaphysics, but Plato believes that everyone is kind of like, it's a form of reincarnation. So my soul has existed for eternity past. And so my soul is just same old soul that's been around forever in a new body. So if I come to know something, then this is how he answers it. It's very interesting. It's not that I'm coming to know something new, it's that someone has reminded me of what my soul already knew back in the day. So Plato thinks that all souls live in Hades, which is not like what we would think of as hell. It's just kind of like, where things that aren't existent in real life are. And by real life, I mean the physical world. They're real, in a sense. So all souls exist there, and then new people are born, and old souls are put into new people. So he proves with this dialogue with a slave boy. So he takes, I don't think we're going to read about this. If we do, just ignore me and we'll talk about it later. But he takes this slave boy and tries to figure out this math problem with the slave boy. And he's asking him all these questions. He's like, okay, so what's this and what's this and what's this? And eventually the slave boy gets to the right answer, even though he didn't know the answer previously. So Plato says that the way he has that knowledge is because he was reminded of what his soul already knew. And that's why he was able to just come up with the knowledge, because it wasn't that he was coming up with something new, it was that he was just remembering. So the only thing that Socrates in the dialogue was doing was triggering memory for the slave boy. So he wasn't teaching him anything new, he was not telling him the answers. So how else would the slave boy have come up with the right answer unless he had previously known it? Is kind of the assumption there. So for Plato, you search for things because your soul actually does know it, and your body, it goes through this like trauma of birth and forgets all this knowledge. And so you have to be reminded, and then you're able to have the knowledge again. So you could also believe that. That's another option. Not super popular these days, but you never know. Yeah. So if you want to know more about that, you should look it up. It's good, or ask me. Very interesting. He talks about this in the Republic a lot. The main dialogues for Plato are Meno, the Phaedo, the Republic. Oh, what are some others? The Apology. That's just Socrates pretty much, though. Yeah. Anyways, I'm just kind of talking about Plato. It's not important. So next time we're gonna dive into the Gettier cases, and because Plato is operating under the belief that justified true belief is knowledge. So we're gonna talk about on Thursday how that might not be the case. Justified true belief might not be knowledge. So yeah, we'll just cut it short today. Mostly because I don't know why I can't. I'm running out of breath. So, you'll have a good weekend. And by that I mean week. It's not the weekend. It's Monday when I'm recording this. Have a good week. Enjoy yourselves. Let me know if you have any questions. And yeah, have a good one.